pre-med students as you all matriculate. And so any questions and things that you may have, if you want to meet even after you do the workshop, you have additional questions, some things about like applying for medical school or working through the MCAT interview process, all those good things, then you can definitely reach out. But it's great to be here and thank you, Emily.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, well, um, today we have Mark Mills here, who is part of our MCAT Assist program, and he's going to be leading tonight's workshop. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to him.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. It's so nice to see everybody here. Before I share my screen, would you all mind telling me kind of where you're at in your undergrad journeys, where are you guys from, just so I know what kind of audience I'm talking to? Oh, you guys can't see me? Oh, that's too bad. Let's see if I share my screen. You might be able to see my screen. That's odd. Okay. Can you all see my screen okay? Okay. All right. So just to get a feel for the room, are you guys juniors, seniors, freshmen, sophomores? You can just pop it in the chat if you'd rather. All right. Sophomore, senior, all right. Junior. Nice. A great spread. So, I'll make to and graduated. Congrats. So I'll make today's talk just kind of geared towards everybody because I know that there's kind of one traditional pathway that's um, known well, but that's definitely not the only way to do it. There's a lot of different timings that work. So please feel free to ever ask a question if you have a um, specific situation. If you're like, hey, I know all my friends, think about taking the MCAT when they were a junior, but that's just not where I'm at. Please just let me know if you have that kind of question because it's definitely a lot of ways to succeed. So before I get too more ahead of myself, my name's Mark. I'm a first year med student here at OU Tulsa. So I graduated last year, and so I took the MCAT about 2 years ago. Um, it's been a little bit, but it's still definitely not an experience you tend to forget. Some people want to forget it, but I think that there's a lot of anxiety and fear and stress that surrounds the MCAT. And so I just wanted to have this night's workshop be a time for you all to maybe think about some of those anxieties and see what you can do to just take positive steps forward, no matter where you're starting from. Okay, so let's get started here. Okay, so demystifying the MCAT. So we got to start with seeing if we can demystify some things. So this is true, false, and we'll just go one at a time. And again, you can shout out or just put your answer in the chat. So, true or false? The best way to study for the MCAT is to start studying yesterday. False. Yeah, you guys are smart. You're catching on. Um, yeah, so I remember from my own experience and my experience with my friends and other pre-meds that I knew, it always felt like this MCAT was this big, huge, scary thing, and you felt like that you had to start right away or else you were going to be behind. But that's really not true. Um, in my undergrad years, I was a TA for my college's pre-health program. And so I worked with a lot of freshmen that were worried about it. And I'd always tell them, don't even start thinking about the MCAT. Like forget the MCAT exists until maybe you're done with your sophomore year. Because really the best way to study for the MCAT is just to focus and work hard in all your prerequisite classes. And we'll talk more about what those prerequisite classes are later. But the MCAT is really it's a test that tests a lot of things, but the foundation of what it tests is just content knowledge. And the best way to get that content knowledge is just from taking the class that covers that content. And usually it's easier to learn something well the first time than to try and relearn it yourself later when you're under a time pressure. So I would say that your first priority for working towards the MCAT would just be making sure that you've done your prerequisite classes. You don't have to have all of them done, but definitely the majority. We can talk more about that later. Okay, next question. True, false? There's only one right way to approach the MCAT. False, false, false. Yeah, that's true. Um, whatever way that works best for you is the way that works best for you. There's a lot of varieties and approaches. There's a lot of like consensus knowledge and consensus strategies and just things that a lot of people do. And some of those are valuable for you, some of them are not. Some of them are can be directly unhelpful to just the way that you learn and the way that you approach challenges. And some things won't fit well for your life. Because some people, might be able to take a semester with less classes to just really focus hard for a certain amount of time. Some people need to work for a while they're also studying. So in everything, but especially the MCAT, it's so hard to not compare yourself to what everybody else is doing and to feel like you got to do what everybody else is doing. But really, I would just encourage you to continue to focus on just what's going to be most helpful for me, what's the best thing I can do for myself today, and just take it like that. Okay. Question number 3. Reddit and Student Doctor Network are the best sources of information about my self-worth as a human being. Yeah, appreciate the all caps, definitely false. So like when I was studying for the MCAT, sometimes I would find myself like after a hard day where maybe I didn't feel like I studied as much as I needed to. And I would just find myself like it'd be like 11:30 and I'm on r/pre-med or something looking at people posting their like out of this world practice test scores and stuff like that. And sure, there are some valuable resources and things that you can find through those forums. But definitely that's like stop number one for feeling like you're not doing as well as you should, or that you need to do it the way that other people are doing it, besides focusing on, your own path to success. And so, okay, question number 4. This one might be a little bit trickier, but we'll see how you guys do. It's better to take the MCAT once you're ready than to rush to take it by a certain date. I can't trick you all. Yes, it's true. It's better to take it when you're ready. Because actually the MCAT actively tries to discourage you from taking it when you're not ready. Like there's actual limits on how many times you can take the test. I think you can take it twice in 1 year, 3 times within 2 years, and then lifetime you can only take it 7 times. So they're really saying the right way to do it is not to show up like it's game day before you're ready to really perform. Um, and it's just much better for yourself emotionally to just take it when you're ready and to do well and move on to the next step of your life. Rather than, and I had some friends who are in this situation where they worked hard, but maybe the timing was a little bit too tight for them. Maybe they didn't do as well as they would like. So then they had a debate like, oh, do I need to keep studying to retake it? Am I going to do well enough? Am I going to need to change my plan? Like, am I going to now have to think about a gap year? Stuff like that. And schools can see all your official attempts, but you can take as many unofficial, like third party and AAMC practice tests as you would like. So I took a bunch of different practice tests, and that was just really beneficial. That lets you learn how the test works. But that's just between you and your own progress. And so I'd say if you've got the choice between, maybe waiting another month or two, feel okay pushing it back if that's just what you need to be ready for that day, rather than trying to take it when you're not ready yet. Okay. So question number 5, I think. The MCAT is the most important part of my medical school application. Best for last. Well, I at least got some question mark this time. And true and false. Yeah. So it can really feel that way. And this is really open to opinion. And the thing is, there's a bunch of schools out there, and a bunch of schools might say a bunch of different things. And so I would say that the MCAT is just one piece, and it's an important piece. It's not the only piece for sure. So you shouldn't sacrifice all the other pieces just for the MCAT. The way that I like to think about it is that your raw numbers, like the MCAT, your GPA, that is what helps you kind of get your foot in the door. That kind of says to the schools, I'm someone who can work hard. I'm someone who can achieve a goal. I can set, good study habits. I have this discipline. Um, I have a certain amount of academic ability, but it doesn't tell them who you are as a person. And that's such an important part of just um, your life. It's such an important part of what they're looking for. They want to know that you know who you are. They want to know why it is you want to go into medicine. And so if you say that, you know, the MCAT is it's the only thing that matters. My grades are the only things that matter. There are people with a 528 and a 4.0 who haven't gotten into medical school. And there's plenty of people with like an MCAT that's much less than that, with a not perfect GPA that have gone to med school and really succeeded. So the MCAT is important, but that's kind of as far as it goes. And the mix of your successful application is different for everybody. So say you have really strong extracurriculars, you have a ton of experience, those things matter. And say you have to work a lot. So maybe you don't have time to study for every single test, like people who don't work. So maybe your GPA is a little bit less. But schools can see that you're still working, you're still someone who is cares and is working towards goals. And so then when you get to the application, um, that's still an opportunity to tell that story. And so don't feel like um, that you have to be perfect in every single area of applying to med school. You just try and do your best overall for whatever that means for you. And that's not to say that the MCAT is, just a something you just show up for on a Saturday and it goes how it goes, and that's all it takes. It definitely takes a lot of determined work. Um, and you definitely need to succeed at a certain level, but that's within reason and that's relative to like what schools you're applying to what your own strengths are. All right. Does anybody have any questions or any other maybe MCAT myths that they've heard of that we might need to bust right out of the gate? And Emily, do you remember any that you had to like fight off yourself?
I think I remember just thinking that I had to study all day, every day. Um, and that is definitely not true. Um, there's definitely a lot of time that goes into it, but you build it around your schedule and your other commitments, and you make it work, and it can be manageable.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And we can get later, we can get into what are some ways that that balance works out, but we can go ahead and get into some more of the details. Okay. So this is the AAMC's own definition of what the MCAT is. So it's a test, and what they're looking for is problem solving, critical thinking, and knowledge of several different areas. And so part of the test is just knowing the stuff, kind of like first order questions. Um, like, if you add oxygen and hydrogen together, you might get water. Just simple questions. And one thing that really surprised me when I was studying for the MCAT was just how easy a lot of the questions were sometimes. A lot of times I found that the stuff that I learned and the work that I did in my prerequisite classes actually went deeper and was more challenging than what the MCAT actually asked for. So the MCAT is a really massive, huge pool, and it's really intimidating because it's asking about a bunch of different subjects. But they can only ask so many questions. So they kind of will only be able to ask about a certain number of things. And a lot of times, um, like you might not feel like you know everything there is to know about chemistry, but you probably know a lot of the solid basics in chemistry, and you have some practice with the solid basics. And then you can use your problem solving skills to say, I might not know this question immediately right off the bat. This isn't just a memorization thing, but you know enough to be able to figure out the answer. And I think that really gets you a long way with the MCAT is knowing what you know and then knowing how to use what you know to figure out a question that you might not have seen before. And a lot of times they give you the information that you need to find the answer. And you just need to know like how to read the graph the right way, how to read the prompt, how to put together the numbers that to give you. And so there's a lot of tools that you can build so you can succeed in a lot of different questions rather than feeling like I need to know everything there is to know about all of these subjects, if that makes sense. Okay. And the last part of this definition is stuff because it's a prerequisite to the study of medicine. And I think something that I think about now in medical school that I really appreciate about medical school is that you're learning this stuff for a reason. You want to go into the world and do great things and help people. And um, maybe when you're studying for the MCAT, it can get really intimidating with just the volume of information that you feel like you need to know. So I'd say just continue to remind yourself why you're working towards the goal that you're working towards and just what is keep in touch with the things that make you passionate, keep in touch with the things that you care about, because that's what's going to keep you going through the process of studying for the MCAT, trying to get your good grades, trying to have your experiences. And then that makes it so that when you get into, the application season, it's not a question of um, my whole life has been towards just getting into medical school. Because then what happens? A, you get into medical school. Congrats. But now what? You have 4 years left, then you have to go to residency, maybe a fellowship, and then you're, in a difficult profession. And if your whole life goal has just been to get into medical school, you're probably going to struggle. You might not know what you're supposed to do now. And say you don't get into med school the first time, that's probably going to feel really defeating. That's probably going to be like you might be feeling like that you really failed at your only purpose in life, and that's just not true. And there's a lot of people that get into medical school successfully, like the second or third time, or however many times that it takes. And one thing that they look for is just determination and then resilience. So I would say continue to have your end goals in mind as you're working towards this, sometimes overwhelming application. So I see we have a question in the chat about how much extracurriculars play a part. And I would say in everything um, it's about balance. And I would say you just want to demonstrate that you are passionate about topics, you're passionate about things in the world, and that you want to that you have an active interest in those, and you have demonstrated a pattern of going and participating in those things. Because medicine is a team sport, and so extracurriculars just speak towards being able to work well with other people, and it's different for everybody. Okay. Yes. We've got another question in the chat. I think that we will talk towards just how to study in your different situations through the rest of the presentation, and we'll circle back at the end if we haven't covered anybody's specific situation. Okay, so this is just a brief overview of the test if you're not familiar with it. So there are four main sections, basically chemistry and physics, and critical analysis and reasoning skills, and then biology and biochemistry, and then psychology, sociology. And so each of these sections is basically like its own mini test. And there are different strategies, different content for each of them. So together, it's a really long test, but when you break it down, it's tests of a similar length to what you're used to. And you can organize it in your head by each section. So you can kind of say, okay, for this section, this is what it's asking about. This is what I've practiced as a way to prepare for this section. And then you get a break. And then you can switch gears in your head and say, okay, I did the first one. Now, what is my strategy for the second one? So you can kind of keep up the momentum. It's um, more of like a relay race than a marathon, except you're just passing the baton to yourself, I guess. And so you get a 30-minute mid-exam break. Usually that's lunch. And so just part of preparing for the test is just getting used to the timing, getting used to what snacks should I bring, what should I drink, what's my routine. And I would say the best way to prepare for this is just to do some practice tests to get a feel for how it goes and to see what strategy is going to work for you. So that when you get to the test day, nothing about the timing is a surprise. And you know, okay, during this break, I won't relax, I'll eat my snack. This next break, I can eat lunch and then clear my head and then focus for the second half. Stuff like that. And then I will say, I'll just skip to this part that says void question. So I'm just gonna, this is not a super important thing. I'm just pointing it out to you. It's a tool. So you can say at the end, if you want to have your exam count, to have it be scored, or if you just want to avoid it, just cancel the attempt. And so if you find yourself in a situation where it's really obvious to yourself that you weren't ready, that it's really not going well, then you do have the option to just say, I'm going to avoid this exam. And then it won't come up as a score. So I would say you really don't want to get into a situation where you might need that. But like, for example, say you were taking the test and all of a sudden you came down really sick or something happened. It's like, um, in that sense, you kind of have a backstop to say that this attempt doesn't count, you got to try again, just in case that's helpful. All right. So yes, you will get 5 results, 4 sections, and then 1 overall combined score. So each section gets you a score from 118 to 132. And then you combine all those, you add them up, and then it's a score range from 472 to 528. And they design it so that the average score is 500. And so you can look up online, there's percentiles and stuff about the score distribution, but they kind of have it as a bell curve. And then something to note that I didn't know right away was that you don't get your score until about a month later. So this is what I was saying about you really just want to take it, know you did as well as you could, and then move on with your life. Because you don't want to be in that month debating, should I start studying again? Because you won't, because you'll be really tired of studying for the MCAT and you just won't want to do it. And um, you just want to set yourself up for keeping up the momentum and working on other parts of your application, like writing primaries or secondaries or whatever it is. Any questions about scoring? Great. And then here's what example of what a score report looks like. And so you can see the breakdown score for each section, and then it gives you a percentile for each subsection, and then overall at the bottom, you can see the overall score and the percentile. So this right here would be an example of an average score. But it gives you the idea that in your head, you might know I'm way better at biology than I am at chemistry. Or you love psychology, but the critical analysis and reasoning skills section is giving you trouble. And so um, a lot of people will just naturally do better in some sections than others. And so something that was helpful for me is at the beginning of thinking about studying, I took a practice test. And it actually took me like 3 days to take the practice test because I took like one section and I was like, woo, I need a break. I'll do the next section tomorrow. And at the end of it, I got my score back and I was like, wow, okay, I have a lot to work on. But it lets you see just what the test is like. It gives you an idea of the types of questions you'll be asked. It gives you an idea of the timing. And then it lets you know what some of your strengths and weaknesses might be. So for this person, they've got, a 35 percentile score, 123 in the critical analysis and reasoning skills section. So they know that the work they do in that section will be even more important. It'll pay off even more. And so for these two bottom sections, they did pretty well. They did better. It's like 70 percentile. If you were overall 70 percentile on your MCAT, that'd be pretty competitive. So they might say, I only have so much time to study. So at the beginning, they might say, I'm going to focus more on chemistry and physics and critical analysis and reasoning because that's where I can do myself the most help. And so just throughout the process, I would say continue to just focus on your weaknesses, continue to focus on what you don't know instead of just continuing to practice things that you're already good at or subjects that you already know. So that way that you're using your time most effectively. Okay. And then I'll just speak a little bit more about the critical analysis reading skills because I haven't done that yet. It's basically like a reading comprehension part of the test. So historically for pre-meds, we're used to doing chemistry and science stuff. They can maybe struggle a little bit more because it's different. It's like a totally different part of your brain where it gives you a prompt like you might remember from an English class, and then you've got to figure out questions about the content, where it's not a piece of content that you can study. It's like all the answers are in the text. You're just trying to figure out what the text is communicating. And so praying for that one is a little bit different. But it also is, I thought it was kind of fun. Do they care more about the breakdown or the overall score? So that's a good question. I would say most of the time they'll start with the overall score. And if they want to look at the breakdown, they might. But I would say the overall score tends to be more important just because that's what they're using to kind of look at the national pool of applicants and the historical pool of applicants. But for yourself, I would say the breakdown is really helpful because that lets you see where you should focus on. Okay, let's go to page. All right. So we talked about the MCAT in broad terms, how you know what else is on there specifically. So the AAMC does a great job giving you information about the tests. That's something I didn't really take advantage of, but there's a lot of free resources and stuff that they put out there. So you can make your whole study plan just from free AAMC resources. They have a content outline document that's on here that has basically every single subject like listed out. And you could really say, okay, and I've had friends who did this, who said, this tells me all the topics, and I know what I'm good at, know what I'm not good at, so I can look at all these different line items and proceed that way. And I believe that these slides will be shared with you also be able to visit these hyperlinks and stuff. Actually, let's see if we can. Yes, so I won't visit it right now because it looks like a student account, but you guys can make your AMC account, which will be helpful because that's how you submit the MCAS application anyways, and explore the free resources that they have available. All right. So these are just some other things to be aware of. So the AMC is one of the main sort of organizations out there. They're who administers the MCAT. They put out a lot of official MCAT resources and practice tests and stuff like that. And the AMCAS is the centralized application system for most of the country, and for especially for MD schools. And then there's also the AA-COMAS, which is for the U.S. osteopathic medical schools. And I went to college in Texas. I don't know if any of you all are familiar, but Texas also has their own centralized application called the TMD SAS. You can put a question in the chat if you have um, a question about any of those application services, because I actually did all three applications, which was probably a mistake, but it worked out. It's fine. Okay. When to take the MCAT? This is kind of a big question because you want to be ready to go. You kind of want to have a plan, and it requires some thinking ahead. So I mentioned there's kind of a traditional timeline, there's a traditional pathway, but again, it's not the only way to do it. So pre-med students typically take it in the spring or summer um, prior to their planned medical school application cycle. So that can be confusing, but say you want to start medical school next year. So yeah, say you want to start medical school next year in fall of 2025. So typically you would take the MCAT in the spring. Like for example, I took mine at the end of April. Then medical school applications open up in May and June. And then you submit your applications, your primary application. And then about a month later, at the beginning of July, they start sending out your primaries to schools. And then schools start sending out, excuse me, all of their secondary applications. And then you do all their secondary applications in July, maybe August, maybe later. And then after you start submitting secondary applications, schools start vetting you for interview spots. And so then you might get interview invites. I think the very earliest ones are in August, but interview season can really go from August all the way to like the next summer or to like maybe the end of May. So that is a certain amount of time, and it just takes that long because that's just how the cycle works. So say you're a sophomore. So you would plan to take it at the end of your junior year, and then you'd want to submit your applications at the summer after your junior year. So then during that summer, you submit your secondaries, and then during your senior year, you're doing interviews, and then the year after that, you're going to medical school, hopefully, or doing a growth year or something like that. But it doesn't have to be that timeline. It can be you take the test after your senior year. And it can be you take the test after you've had a whole career as a composer and you're 40 and you're decided, I want to go to medical school. And I'm describing somebody in my class. That's not a made-up example. And so, like I said, there's a lot of ways to do it, but the whole application cycle takes about a year. So you want to start thinking about studying for the MCAT probably at least 6 months before you're actually going to take the MCAT, if that makes sense. And that depends on your life circumstances. In the traditional pathway, I would say when you're a student in college, and you're trying to go into med school right after college, I would say the best way to do it, in my opinion, there's a lot of ways to do it, is to spend like 3 or 4 months before you take the MCAT just really focused on doing it. Just really, um, really work hard, have it be one of your main priorities. Maybe take less classes if you can. Maybe don't work as much hours. Maybe take easier classes. But say for me, that looked like I started studying in January, and I studied hard until April, and then I did my applications. For some people, maybe they start some studying the summer or fall of their junior year, and then take it the January of their junior year. And then they spend time during the rest of their junior year, maybe pre-writing, maybe getting more experience, stuff like that. So this gives you a look at all the different test dates. It's offered a bunch of times through the year. So no matter what your circumstances, your plan is, you'll probably be able to find a date that works for you. Most of them are kind of centered to be relevant for the application cycle. So you can see kind of starts in January, there's a bunch, and then 2 months later in March, April, May, June, it's pretty consistent, and it kind of tapers off through July, August, September. And it's generally to your advantage to be kind of ahead of the schedule when it comes to applications and stuff. It's better to submit your things at the beginning of the process than towards the end. So if this was a cycle year, I would probably say it would be best to not really take the MCAT later than maybe May or June, because then that just lets yourself focus on writing your applications, and then it lets the schools focus on, okay, they've done everything they need to do. They're ready for their interview. You don't want the MCAT score, because remember, it takes 30 plus days to get back. You don't want that to be holding up an interview spot, if that makes sense. So before we move on to talking some more about prerequisite coursework, does anybody have questions on kind of the cycle through the year? Great. And if you want to save your questions for the end, that's fine too. Okay, so these are recommended prerequisites for the MCAT. So a bunch of medical schools are out there. They all have the same kind of prerequisites, but there's a lot of variations. And so this is sort of the agreed upon prerequisite list that covers all the content on the MCAT. So 2 or 3 semesters of biology, you'll probably have you probably have taken most of that already. 2 semesters of chemistry, some organic chemistry, 2 semesters of physics, and some biochemistry experience, maybe some biology or biochemistry lab experience, psychology, sociology, and then some kind of statistics class that makes you think about experimental data, like stuff like just how to tell whether data is significant, not significant, how to become familiar with reading graphs, stuff like that. And so then they have just on here humanities, and that can be really anything. I'm actually had a humanities major. I love humanities. That's on there just to say practice thinking, practice writing, practice reading, just practice being able to work with text, use your critical reasoning skills. That's really helpful for the critical analysis and reasoning section. And so let me use biochemistry as an example, because sometimes I think you see different prereqs listed, and that's because sometimes the MCAT will use something from a class maybe one step advanced to present an idea. But to solve the question, you can still use your basic principles of whatever it is. So Say it looks like a biochemistry question, and then you've got some kind of complicated, chemical process, some kind of complicated molecule, something that seems like, geez, I haven't studied this. How am I going to get this question right? And um, if you have taken, your basic biology, probably you'll have all the information that you need to still get the question right. But sometimes, if you have taken biochemistry, you'll be able to just to recognize the type of experiment or just the type of um, graph or the type of famous like sample experiment that kind of showed us how we know what we know, if that makes sense. Um, the one that I have in my head that's just stuck in my head so much is like I think it's Mieselson and Stahl, and they're the ones that figured out that DNA replication is semi-conservative. And so you might see a question, and this is big long prompt that's explaining their experiment. But if you have taken some classes that maybe aren't technical prerequisites, but they're just continuing to advance your knowledge, you might recognize that and say, ah, I know what they're asking about. So I can save myself time and see, okay, yes, I know what they're talking about. This is the answer. And so that can be true for a lot of different strategies on the MCAT, is just thinking about what are they asking? Just continue to ask yourself, what are they asking? And answer that question. And a lot of times you can get to the answer more quickly than you might expect. Okay. So next we can go through some concrete steps, just working towards what you need to do to actually take the test, because it's kind of a process. First thing to do is to register for an AAMC ID, because that's just who administers the test. So you just need to make an AAMC account, and then you use that ID and password kind of through the whole application cycle, especially if you do the AMCAS application. And so that'll be where you see your scores and then send them out to schools. So the question about psychology and sociology, do intro courses count? Like intro to psych, intro to sociology? Yeah, that's what they mean. Most of the time, the questions on the MCAT are just asking about basic concepts in the fields that they're asking about. So I only took intro to sociology, intro to psychology, and that was basically exactly what I needed to know for the test. Yeah. They don't expect you to say, okay, I need to take intro to psychology, I need to take intermediate psychology, and then advanced psychology, and then the prereq that they have is like some 4,000 level psychology class. No, it's like starting from zero. Like I haven't taken any biology, and I take bio 1 and I take bio 2. And that's the two classes that they mean. Okay. So then make sure that you check your ID. When they sign you in for the test, your name must exactly match how it appears on your ID. And you just don't want that to be the reason you can't take the test that day. And then you want to make sure that when you're registering, you read and answer all the questions carefully. Okay. And so there is a cost to the test. There's a lot of costs in terms of potential resources out there, but this is the basic standard cost to schedule and take the test. This is another reason why you don't want to take it when you're not ready for it, because it's pretty expensive. So as of recently, the cost is $345. Say you scheduled it and then you realize you needed to push it back. Sometimes that means you'll have to pay a fee for switching your date. So depending upon how close you are to the date of the test. So just be aware of that. And so in case that cost is a barrier to being able to take the test, there is the AAMC Fee Assistance Program. So I would just look that up, and then that exists to help people take the test if they wouldn't be able to otherwise without financial assistance. So I would say don't hesitate to apply for that if that's going to be helpful to you. Okay. So finally, what does this MCAT Assist program at OUTU help with? So we're here to help maybe provide some AMC practice exams and study materials. We can kind of give you an idea of what might be a good timeline for you in your specific situation. We're not a content tutoring service. There are some out there, but that's not what we're geared towards. But we can help connect you with a mentor who might be able to share strategies and provide encouragement along the way as you're learning the content and reviewing and practicing and stuff like that. And so this spring, we're hosting 2 mock MCAT exam dates. And if you're taking the exam, this is a great opportunity to do a practice test in kind of a simulated testing environment without it actually being the day of. And so just note we had a recent conflict come up with the January, or not the January, the I think April 22nd date. So that date might need to move. But go ahead and scan this and submit this if you're at all interested in taking a proctored mock exam coming up this spring. We'd love to see you. It'll be held at the OUTU campus in Tulsa. And if that practice date will need to move, we'll make sure to contact you if that's the date that you selected. So yeah, if you actually want to see what I look like, because my camera's not working, come to the mock exam date. Okay. And so I would say just you guys are already doing great just by showing up and being here. That shows you want to learn. That shows you want to figure out what you need to do to prepare. So I would thank you all for coming. And now we can open it up to make sure that we've got people's questions answered. So I know I've got one question in the chat that I can still speak to, but if you've got any more questions, please don't hesitate to send them in, and we can use some time to talk about them. Okay, sure. Yeah, I can talk about my specific way I did it. Yes. Okay, first I'll answer the question I have in the chat about how to maybe approach for it if you've been out of school for a while, you've already graduated, stuff like that. And I want to encourage you to send us an email so that we can have kind of a maybe a more in-depth conversation about your particular situation, because that would probably change how to approach it. I would say make sure you've done the prerequisites. That might involve like some kind of post-baccalaureate program or something. If you've already done all your prereqs and it's just about purely just studying for it. I'll speak to that in a little bit later when I'm just talking about what I did. And also, if you're a non-traditional student, we have a bunch of non-traditional students on our campus. And in my own class, like I was talking about the guy who's like a dad with 5 kids, first year in med school. It's never too late. I can help you get in contact with non-traditional students who have done that. That's not my particular strength because that's not the path that I took. But please, yeah, don't hesitate to reach out. We can get you some more specific answers. Okay. So I gave you a breakdown on what and how I studied. So specifically like how often and for how long and how did you break up the content. So the first thing to know about me is that I am not that guy. There are really specific schedules, study schedules out there. There's like an Excel spreadsheet of every single day and every single topic for every single day. That is what I thought I needed to do. It just didn't work for me that well. And when I started studying in January, I felt like I was behind. I felt like I just needed to jump into it. So I actually signed up for a paid study service. And then after I got into it, after about a month, I realized that it actually wasn't that helpful. It wasn't the kind of resources and help that I needed. And eventually, I actually started using a bunch of free stuff. Um, I used a bunch of Khan Academy videos. Khan Academy has a fantastic free, totally free MCAT series with practice quizzes and stuff like that. I thought they were great. I would go to those whenever I was learning a topic area I was rusty on or I hadn't learned before. Um, I used Anki, ANKI. That's a space repetition flashcard software that is pretty commonly used. Um, there are pre-made decks out there with just thousands and thousands of questions on the MCAT. That's maybe one place where going to Reddit or something is helpful. You can look those up. There's a couple of different other ones. Um, the ones I know of, like there's articles out there saying different Anki decks. I personally used the Jack Sparrow Anki deck. There's other ones. Um, and I used Kaplan practice tests. I used the AAMC practice test. I think I ended up taking like 10 or 11 practice tests. I had a friend who said it a great way is like, then when you're showing up on the actual day, you're just taking another practice test, like practice test number 12. And that really helps you get really familiar with just how you're doing, what the test is like. Um, I used some of the Kaplan books. I didn't do the start to finish kind of content review. I'm going to go through every single page of the Kaplan books like some people do. Um, Instead, I just used the books for the subject material that I wasn't so good at and just used it for how helpful it was for me. Um, some people break it up into content review phase, period, and then practice phase, period. That's not how I did it. I was always doing content review. I was always doing practice. My content review would tell me what kind of practice I needed to do. Then my practice would tell me what kind of content review I needed to do. So towards the end, it kind of got to just like, what do I know I need to learn? Um, what have I been doing poorly on? And I would just keep track of all the questions that I missed. So like whenever I did a practice question set and I missed questions, I would keep track of all those questions and I put them in like a flashcard bank so that I could keep testing myself on them. Whenever I did a practice test, I would take the day after the test or maybe after I gave myself a break for a day and then 2 days after that, I would review the whole test, paying attention to all the questions that I missed, understand why I missed them, understand just kind of the types of questions that are on there. And then if I was missing a certain type of question, then that would help me recognize the type of question in the future and then maybe avoid making similar mistakes. Just kind of in the same vein of just continuing to improve on what you need to do the most. Um, okay. Somebody asked a question about out-of-date study materials. No, that's totally fine. Um, the basic, the basic biology and chemistry and all that stuff like that, it's still the basic information. I don't think that's an issue. So, and 2022 and 2023 is not that long ago. So I think that's probably fine. Okay. Then somebody asked a question about um, studying on your own and such. I would say at most, at the very, 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 very most, you can maybe self-study one, maybe two classes. It's just incredibly challenging to teach yourself it. At the same time, you're studying all this stuff that you learned before. I would say it's really challenging to teach yourself all that new content on a short timeline, especially when you're jumping between a bunch of different things. And I would say that gap years have a bad rep, maybe, but I think that's totally unearned. I think that there's a lot of tremendous opportunities, a lot of tremendous experiences that you can have during a gap year or growth year. And I would say they're not a bad thing at all. sometimes I wish that I had taken a growth year because I've just, once you're in med school, that's what you're doing for 4 years. And then after that, you're going to be a doctor. And so there's just a lot of other things, a lot of other experiences you can have in life. Um, yeah. Are there any paid study resources you know that people have found to be helpful? Sure. There's a bunch out there. I'm sure that you can Google like paid MCAT study resources and find some. I'm sure they would love to sell them to you. I personally, the course I did was the Kaplan course, but I found it to be not as helpful as um, like the money would suggest it would be. I know there's blueprint courses. I know that there's stuff like Shemasian or similar kind of tutor prep websites out there. There's a lot of paid resources. I would just emphasize that you can do it cheaply and you can do it free if if that's what you need to do also. I know that we're basically at our time. Um, if anybody, I'll send a message in the chat. Um, I'm going to put my email in here if you have more questions and um, or if there's just something you'd like some more advice on. And I really appreciate you all coming and participating. Um, and yeah, I think you all will do great. I would say just be your own best friend in this process and don't be your worst enemy because that was really what I struggled with the most, honestly.
All right, thank you so much, Mark. Thank you all for coming. Be on the lookout. We have more Catalyst workshops coming up soon. In February, we're going to have an in-person event on the Tulsa campus, kind of like a Q&A. So be on the lookout for that. And yeah, just let us know if you have any more questions, and hope you have a good evening. Thank you.
And then Emily, could you keep the Zoom open for a little bit so I can answer some questions in the chat?
Yeah,
Thanks.
definitely.
Thanks again, everyone.
I'll answer the question about the slides if it's okay with Mark.
Yeah.
Yes, we're going to email everything that was shared today, and also a link to the video. So
Okay. Um, Lisa, I answered your question. Yeah. Uh, okay. So you're a freshman in college, but a junior by credits. I think that mostly depends on, um, I guess tell me when you're planning on graduating.
So I was talking with my pre-med advisor, and according to my credits, like I don't have all of my courses to take the MCAT yet. So she was wanting me to take the MCAT